Okay, welcome folks. For those of you who are just popping in, we are going to jump here in just a couple minutes. We're going to give folks some time to filter in before we kick off. I can see folks are still popping into the room. Thanks for joining us. Okay. Well, let's get going. So welcome to this roundtable discussion. We are the Cultivated Meat Modeling Consortium, and we are super thrilled to have with us some really expert folks in the world of cultivated meat who are doing some great work to accelerate this industry. And I want to introduce you to who is on the call. We have Simon Kahan. He is the CEO of Biocellion. His relationship to the cultivated meat field began in 2017 when he asked the question, how might computational modeling help get quality products to market faster? And pursuing that answer led him to co-found the CMMC, where he is volunteering and providing administrative and technical leadership. His story is one of innovation, shaping supercomputing landscapes, making strides in computational biology. His ability to bridge academia and industry is coupled with an outstanding commitment to addressing global challenges. And that defines his career, focused on impact. Dr. Dhiraj Singh is on our call. He is the head of research and development at Umami Bioworks, leading a team of scientists to develop novel cell lines, media, and cutting-edge bioprocessing technologies for sustainable cultivated meat production. And he's been doing it for 10 years with 10 years of experience in cell and molecular biology, playing a critical role in driving innovation and scientific advancements at Umami Bioworks. So thanks, Dhiraj, for being with us. It's great to see you and have you with us. Jolene Lum is the head of business development of Nurasa, Singapore-based company. It's dedicated to accelerating the commercialization, adoption of sustainable food across Asia. She works closely with promising food tech startups to facilitate new industry connections and provides guidance on leveraging Nurasa's end-to-end capabilities, including pilot scale facilities at the Food Technology Innovation Center. Jolene is driven by passion for sustainable development and innovation, which is why she founded and served as CEO of Urban Tiller prior to joining Nurasa. And her experience, entrepreneurial experience, has led her to become a venture builder for ag tech at Singaporean innovation firm Renergy. And she co-built the operations of Feedworks, which is an insect farming enterprise for sustainable animal feed in Singapore, and helped to establish Mycovation, which is one of Asia's first mycelium alternative protein startups. We also have on the call Dr. Elliot Swartz. Dr. Elliot Swartz is a principal scientist specializing in cultivated meat at the Good Food Institute, gfi.org. You may have heard of it. An international network of nonprofit organizations that's developing the roadmap for sustainable, secure, and just protein supply. Elliot's work, GFI, is focusing on analyzing technical and economic bottlenecks facing the cultivated meat industry. You may have seen him not so long ago at one of our roundtable discussions talking about the techno-economic bottlenecks. At the time, he continues to update that work constantly, identifying opportunities to accelerate the industry, educating scientists and the public and other stakeholders. And for the past 5 years, Elliot's worked on projects ranging from food safety and environmental impact to in-depth analysis of the cultivated meat value chain. So thank you so much, Elliot, for being here. Elliot is also on our governance group, and we've been fortunate to have his guidance for the last several years. Jinesh Shah is managing partner at AltX Ventures. Through his company, he's independently collaborated with numerous sustainable protein and materials startups worldwide, which includes notable names like Eat Just and Good Dot. Being an alumnus of NYU and Y Combinator, Jinesh currently also serves as the Chief Investment Officer at Amasa VC, India's first and only impact venture capital fund focused on disrupting animal agriculture by investing in sustainable future of food, materials, and beyond. So thanks, Jinesh, for being with us. Sandra is here. Sandra Gomez Romero is a CMMC member and a PhD student at Colorado School of Mines. She holds a BS in biomedical engineering and chemical and biological engineering from Johns Hopkins. She's working to develop a porcine genome scale model. And we meet every week for Sandra and her team to update us on how that's going. It's been really really satisfying part of our journey to support that work and watch it develop. Sandra's been, she has experience modifying E. coli and yeast strains and scaling up fermentation systems for the food industry. And she's worked in tissue engineering, stem cell and bioprocessing labs, but she's particularly passionate about alternative proteins and food security. And in this PigGem project that I mentioned, Sandra is carrying out the experiments that are required to determine biomass composition and the modeling required to curate this gem by conducting flux balance analysis and integrating transcriptomic data. So thanks for being with us, Sandra. Dr. Viknish. Viknish grew up loving meat, but gave it up by choice more than 20 years ago. He began co-developing Cellivate's technologies as a solution for cell biology problems and was excited when he realized that it could help make slaughter-free cultivated meat part of our future. Viknish is determined to follow in the footsteps of scientists who were not contented to have their major contributions published and archived. Rather, he wants to apply his science and knowledge to help society. So through Cellivate technologies, Viknish is aiming to enable a reduction in animal husbandry. And as for me and myself, my name is Chris Clark. For the last 10 years, I've been working to build more humane and forward-thinking organizations that are aligned with purpose. I'm a co-founder of the CMMC and responsible for stewarding our ongoing operations and help it evolve from this novel idea to hopefully an increasingly creative force within the field of cultivated meat. My specialty is bringing people together from across disciplines to imagine and create and think differently and practically for impact. And I live in Seattle. So thank you all for joining us. This is how we're going to go. We're just about to wrap up the introduction here. The last thing I want to say is just how this is going to be structured. So we've got several questions planned to ask our esteemed panelists here. And we're going to take about 40 minutes to do that, after which we're going to switch into Q&A. And if you have a question at any point as we go through the session, feel free to type it into the chat. And Eileen, who is here from the CMMC, will be gathering those questions. And when it comes time for the Q&A, she'll bring them to our attention. So with that said, let's dive in. Let us start, if we may, Elliot, with you. So part of the reason why we wanted to jump in and have this session is we wanted to evaluate the cultivated meat landscape and examine how current emerging trends in the greater global economic context might represent challenges or opportunities for the industry. And then in light of these contexts, how can we shape our efforts to more meaningfully advance it? So I thought we would start out just by asking you all your general sense of what major forces or dynamics are currently shaping the cultivated meat space that have arisen in the past year. So looking back at 2023, it's an appropriate time of the year to do that. What's happened that significantly shaped or changed the space? And also, which of these give us reason for optimism that perhaps the industry can compete with traditional agriculture, and which of these might make us less optimistic? Elliot, can we start with you?
Sure, thanks, Chris. So I think the biggest trend this year, similar to other industries, is just a slowdown in the investing environment. So I think that's something that everyone probably feels if you're at a company. I'll let others probably speak to that better. I'd say that, overall, should probably just focus on getting products successfully to market before we start to, talk about competing with traditional agriculture. But I'd say one of the observations that I would have is just the evolution of a more mature industry. And so there's a lot of B2B players that are emerging that specialize along the value chain, whether that's in cell lines or media, specialty ingredients, bioprocess solutions, et cetera, that are starting to, I think, create solutions that can feed into the broader ecosystem, as well as the research and development ecosystem around the world. And so from GFI's perspective, those things have grown quite a bit over the last year or two.
Yeah, great. And I'll let others jump in as well.
So I'll just take a bit of time what Elliot just told. As he mentioned, there is a significant slowdown in the industry in recent past for various reasons, but that also kind of ensure that if a company has to get money, you need to do some deeper due diligence on the technical side, which is a great sign because that's also leads to greater confidence in the industry. As an industry, as an ecosystem of cultivated meat, we need to show more data and also ensure to the investors, to the public, and among peers, like in respective industries, that we are ready to take the next step. Another thing I believe is important is we should come together as an industry and communicate in unison that this is real, and don't claim that we are in a position to the existing industries, be it meat or any food businesses. Probably we need to get our messaging right. So that will help us to move faster and counter the negativity around this entire cultivated meat space, which is stemming from some of the not so optimal research studies, which is claiming in terms of LCA or TA analysis. So yeah, we need to counter that as well.
Yeah, thanks, Dhiraj. Others?
Yeah, I think one of the upsides of the decrease in funding is that it forces companies to start thinking about, I've got to make my money stretch a much longer time. What can I get for free? Well, maybe I can find another company that has something to offer me, and I can offer them something in exchange, and we both win because we reduce the redundancy and increase the efficiency. And forming those kinds of partnerships is a natural it's a natural follow-on to clamping down on the available funding, as of course in the extreme is consolidation.
So from Cellivate's perspective, we are an enabler to cultivated meat companies. So we work with cultivated meat companies, and what we have been experiencing is that there is an extra degree or extra level of risk from the investor's point of view, because we are dependent on the success of the cultivated meat companies for our success, right? So we are hearing that very loudly from the investors that you are dependent on an industry that is already very risky. So funding is tight everywhere around the world now, but I think in our space it's a little bit tighter because certain expectations were not met, or maybe a lot of over promises were made over the last 2 years also. And so now there is a heightened level of skepticism, which I think now all of us here and all of us around the world have a responsibility to change. Right? We need to set expectations right, and also to be extremely honest about where we are and what's really possible in the next 1 year, next 2 years, next 3 years. I agree with Elliot. Perhaps to compete with the traditional meat industry at this stage should not be something we think too much about, right? I think we need to get our foundations right, and to be very clear about what the deliverables that we can meet are, before actually going after that big goal of the traditional meat industry.
Maybe just quickly jumping in on that as well, echoing the comments that we are at a different stage of maturity. Funding is tight. What I do want to highlight as well, from Singapore is we're starting to see a little bit more doubling down on, recognizing that we are at a different stage. So recently, the Singapore Food Agency, of course, the first food agency to approve the sale of cultivated meat, and the Singaporean government has also announced new key opportunities and hurdles. And there's actually a grant call that has opened towards the last quarter of this year, focusing on a few things, right? And it's really just to lower the cost of production. And, they actually call it the mid-technology readiness level kind of tech with putting out grant money for. And that's encouraging to me in a few ways, right? So I think the private sector funding crisis is going to happen. But with the Singapore government putting out grant calls to lower the cost of cell and growth media, to develop customizable scaffolds for better qualities and optimize bioprocessing, all of this information is on the Singapore Food Agency website. I don't work for the Singapore Food Agency, but I think it's a great opportunity for companies to actually take up grant funding like that to continue the R&D required to really take the industry to the next level. So that's also exciting. In other news, I guess the other key factor that I've been reading about, so this morning we see that France has also tried to put in a cultivated meat ban following Italy. And of course, there's also statespeople in the US, in Florida, that are looking at the same things. So I think these remain very real risks. And I think that comes back to which jurisdictions and countries are ready to be a home to innovation happening here, and also the commercialization phases.
I would like to jump in on that because you mentioned grant funding. And I'm on the academic side. I'm still a student, but my PI is the one always scoping for funding opportunities. And after the whole FDA approval landmark, a lot more agencies are willing to fund research. Like, it's just not only like the NSF, like the DOE is also hoping on it. And by having different government agencies expand or accept cultivated meat research, it's getting academia more interested. It used to be something that some PIs had the money to accept the risk and go into it, but that's really hard for a PI to create a branch of research that you cannot continue supporting year over year. And now that different funding agencies are accepting cultivated meat research as something that is becoming more mainstream or more accepted, I think that at least academia is going to be able to bring more open source knowledge that people can share, basically. So I think that is something to be optimistic about. But yeah, also like the whole media perception and like the whole like states and countries banning it is something to be less optimistic about. But yeah, that's my input. I think that it's good that different government agencies are accepting cultivated meat research.
Quickly jumping in here. So I also wanted to add that I had the opportunity or the privilege of starting a cultivated meat company back in 2019 as well, part of Wild Studios, and raised a little bit of funding. And now, a few years later, on the investment side, I've been an angel investor at Eat Just and Good Meats, of course, in the cultivated space, and then looking at several other aspects through MSVC and AltX Ventures as well. I'd like to add a couple of pieces of information. I think everyone talked about the investment slowdown, and I think one thing that we're perhaps missing highlighting overall, which is actually works to our benefit, is that there was sort of a hype cycle in the oil protein space from a purely investment perspective for a few years in terms of valuations being very lofty. And I think a few of the panel speakers just mentioned before me, that I think there were more over-promises made, perhaps. And I think for the long term, this bodes well. Everything that's happening overall, of course, there are friends in the industry that I have who are founders. It's sort of hard to see some of the companies shutting down or consolidating. But at the same time, the valuation corrections, one, offer us an opportunity, to the whole investment community to come in and jump in at better valuations. And so I think there will hopefully be, what we're seeing in the industry indications, a clearer bounce back in the overall startup investment space in the second half of 2024. And equally so, I think this valuation correction means just a lot more grounding, I guess. It's just grounding in reality for the whole industry. And I think a couple of other things to add. I think we are seeing some diversification in funding geographically overall around the globe. The US still dominating. I think the piece that suffered them essentially, which is, I think, a lot of the companies that are working on the scale-up challenges at this point, right? So I think that needs to change a little bit. Excitingly, because I've spent a few years on the ground here in India, I'd like to add a little bit of spice or flavor of the Indian element at play here. We now have over 120 alternative protein startups in India. Of course, a very small fraction of those, about 5 or 6 of them growing, publicly announced cultivated meat startups exist in the space, including ones that are trying to do in seafood or chicken, for example. But then there are companies that are working only on scaffolding or growth media. So I think overall that landscape is evolving. Just in the last year, we've had 2 companies coming into the mix that have raised funding both domestically and internationally, and grants from the government. I heard Sandra mention something about the grants in the public sector funding in the space. And that's increasingly happening with the Department of Biotech in India, the agricultural departments. Surprisingly, we're starting to see more understanding, I think, in entrepreneurs and the government, that even in the cultivated meat space, where there's deeper research involved, we have great opportunity of countries like India coming onto the roadmap. So I think those are the positives, and I think just the slowdown is more just a cyclical aspect of the investment industry, something I've seen personally on Wall Street for a while, and now, of course, on the private investment side. So I think that's something we shouldn't be afraid about. In fact, this bodes well for us in the long term.
Yeah, thanks everyone. So I'm curious, what would need to happen in 2024 in this coming year? Just hearing something about, well, it's a cyclical cyclical behavior that we might expect for new markets to experience this sort of turbulence, things like that. What are some of the milestones that we need to accomplish? What are some of the developments that maybe we're on the cusp of that might go a long way towards increasing that confidence and accelerating the emergence of the technology?
I believe that in next year, we need to kind of show some signs of the price parity and scale up technology. So that will kind of bring a lot of confidence from the technological point of view. At the same time, from other ecosystem partners, I think the government across the globe, like whichever country is supporting the cultivated meat, if the respective regulatory agency, if they can come up with a very clear regulatory framework, that will definitely help the startups in this space to plan their scale-up strategy and entire R&D kind of strategy.
Yeah, I'll piggyback off of that a little bit. I think there's only so much that can happen in a single year, but I think the industry has to make effort into just general de-risking. And so, I think we'll see additional regulatory approvals in 2024 in the United States and Singapore potentially another country or two, that can help sort of, create a little bit of more optimism. But to Dhiraj's point, I think we need more empirical data on the scale up side of things. And that's going to take companies actually, I think, sharing what's actually going on in these facilities, how, efficiently are their operations actually working at this point, and being able to, get a better sense of what the actual techno-economics of cultivated meat production are. Because right now, a lot of that information is siloed within individual companies. And I think there just needs to be a better effort of getting that information out that's more representative of where the industry is at in 2024.
Just to add on the techno-economic analysis, I believe that giving different scenarios, like how we reach to certain scale at certain price, that will be really helpful, because even if, say, in next 1 year we are not able to reach the price parity on the respective meats we are working in different domains, but at least if we based our techno-economic analysis on very unbiased data, or I would say like very oversimplified data, that will at least give a projection that we have a clear plan as an industry to go to the next level. So I think when first of all, we need to share a little bit on that TEA analysis to the world, and also like let's base our techno-economic analysis on a real data which is not oversimplified.
I think I completely agree with the both of you. In fact, I was having a conversation yesterday with another meat company, or 2 days ago with another meat company, and we were discussing the same thing, and also basically the open and transparency between companies, investors, companies, collaborators. But I think another side is the public perception, because what we see is that in certain countries, for example, in the university, people are generally more open to trying cultivated meats, but in other parts, people are still very skeptical. Even in Singapore, which is a small country, people are still very skeptical. And I see more of this outside of Singapore, where they attach a lot of uneducated assumptions around cultivated meat. So these perceptions, I think, need to change, and the only way to do that is through education. So I feel some efforts need to be made on that front in 2024.
I kind of totally agree, and not only to the public, but as a industry, we also need to communicate very coherently to the regulatory bodies, to the countries, to the public, to the funding agencies, that where we are, what we want to do, because the perception is something which need to be tackled from all the ecosystem partners. Consumers are at the center of it, but also the regulatory bodies, how we communicate, how we make certain claims. Like just making outrageous claims will not going to help, because that hype has already diminished. And you'll be surprised to know, when you talk to people who are at certain level of their career in education and in exposure, they're still confused about the cultivated meat and plant-based meat. They're still confused. So we see there is insufficiency of communication, and that should not be responsibility of only one company, but as a industry. We need to communicate coherently, like what is plant-based, what is cultivated meat, how it is different, what are the value proposition if somebody supposed to eat, what are the environmental impact. All these things we need to share very empirically with the respective parties. I think that we should be focused on doing in the next year and a half. That will pave the way for success.
I think a couple of things to add. I think we can definitely benefit by having more geographies participating, first of all, overall cultivated meat industry, even academia around the world, right? Because a lot of the problems we're solving are being dealt with for the very first time. And I think, of course, there's been a lot of great work already from the likes of GFI, the all protein chapters of universities across the world to engage more academia into the mix. But I think at the end of the day, more and more of that will eventually help fuel, better scientists or rather even more scientists with diversified thoughts and, their own learnings from around the world. From an investment perspective, I think slowly what's starting to happen, and I think some of the folks kind of mentioned parts of it, I think benchmarking is slowly starting to come in terms of understanding, hey, like what liter of bioreactor are you at? What cost of media are you sort of paying? Cell lines, immortalized cell lines. I mean, there have been numbers being put to a lot of these things now, which I think would be better for the larger investment industry to come in, of course, investment both from public and private sectors being an important need, being able to transparently and more clearly understand where a company stands at the moment starts becoming very important. And I think that's something we're slowly starting to see form. And I think will shape up even more in 2024. And part of that is, I think, starting to happen because within the 150 plus or beyond cultivated meat and cultivated meat-related companies, startups around the world, we're seeing a lot of independent research organizations emerge as well that are, consulting with or working with existing players, essentially to help them with specific types of problems. But they are independent entities, and as a result, I think that can be part of adding to the benchmarking that everyone else can sort of see in the industry.
So I'm just looking at some of the things that we've mentioned up to this point. We've got in the next year and a half, looking at demonstrating price parity or suggesting perhaps a path towards price parity, being able to demonstrate that scale-up technology works, that there's a path to industrial scale, needing more empirical data so that we can show things like how efficient we're actually able to produce the meat at this point, the cells. Having a clear regulatory framework, efforts to de-risk, more geographies participating, an increase in public perception. So there's a lot that could happen potentially in the next year and a half. I'm wondering if there's one you had to pick that was sort of like the most important one for you as an individual panelist, sitting here today. What's the thing that it feels like it's the most important, or perhaps has the biggest potential to make a difference? And what perhaps might be in the way?
I believe that when we talk about scale up, and of course it's a major challenge for the entire industry, and it sound might a little cliched that all the bioreactors which you have currently cater to the pharma industry, and the processes are also kind of heavily biased towards pharma industry. So if and I also understand from inside that there are a lot of companies, there are a lot of people who are working in a different kind of process development, different kind of bioreactor design, etc. So if as a company, if I have to say, if there is some major breakthrough in that will definitely propel us to the next level. And I'm eagerly waiting that there will be some announcement from some of us who are already working as some of the people who are not part of this this panel, that there is a technology which can scale up the process quickly, cost effectively. So that will definitely help us.
Great. Others? Jolene, I'd love to hear from you and what you.
Yeah, I was actually just reading the comment from Eileen in the chat. Just wanted to respond to that as well. I think it's really important that partnerships, not only with investors and existing believers of the industry, partnering up with meat companies would be great as well. And I think the next few years would actually be really exciting for us to not just educate, but to work with people who have existing distribution and logistics networks to understand what this is, right? I think that plays a huge role in that education as well. I think one of the sort of conundrums of being in Singapore, where we have approved the sale of cultivated meat for a while now, a lot of the average consumers still have not tasted it, right? And that speaks to a supply problem as well. So it's only a very small group who have tasted it, and by virtue of that, understand what it might be. Even when it was out there, not everyone fully understands it. So I think the opportunity to work and collaborate with very strategic partners, including meat companies, is going to be really important. So I think, a lot of what I've been thinking about and the work that I do is how do we actually catalyze these kinds of relationships and partnerships that are meaningful in the long term.
A lot of people also piggybacking on what Eileen has said in her comment. She had mentioned that people need to be proud that they are making meat, and they need to internalize this. The industry needs to stop seeing themselves as a food technology. And that resonates with me because I also run the alternative protein chapter at my school. So I do have students that participate in the chapter. And some of them come because they are excited about technology from an engineering perspective, but some of them come to the meetings because their families have farming backgrounds and they feel threatened by the new industry. And the approach that seems to work the best is to tell them that we are not trying to compete with traditional meat companies. We are diversifying the food industry. If we want sustainability for the future, we need options. And on top of that, when people think meat and they think science, their first gut reaction is to think science does not belong in my food. And that's a mistake. I worked as a food scientist and I worked as a quality control person. Even a traditional beer company, even a traditional meat processing facility needs a scientist, because you need to make sure that you are not putting the consumer at risk. And people, when I tell them this, that the traditional food industry use a scientist and food science is a degree for a reason, people are shocked. And this is a new concept for them, that science is part of the already existing food system. So I think that meat companies need to internalize that the fact that a lot of people in the field are scientists, it's not something wrong. It does not make the industry different from traditional food, the food industry. All of the dairy production plants are really highly regulated because dairy production is really, really delicate. So it's normal. Having science in food production is normal. And I think that people need to know that cultivated meat companies need to stop seeing themselves as just like a science, very science fiction field. It's just another food industry. And science is part of the regular food industry. So that resonated with me. That's something that I try to always bring up in my club meetings.
Yeah, well, I want to ask, so just on this topic of communication, we've spoken a lot about communicating in unison and having a message as an industry, and to speak coherently and to raise public perception, and as you mentioned, Jolene, to have folks taste it and understand what it is, what this is. How does this industry communicate coherently? How does this industry, all of these folks who are involved in this industry, come together to do that? Is that a possibility? What's the mechanism? What's the way forward to doing that? Elliot, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that, because I know GFI's got a big role that you play, is to sort of bring folks together and to help sort of shape these narratives. So any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I not that I've personally focused on this, but I think, even just nomenclature is a big one, especially across languages. I mean, Cultivated has evolved to be somewhat of an industry, preference, but we also see it papers coming out, and also regulatory groups such as those in Australia that say, maybe you need cell cultured or cell cultivated as a sort of qualifier for these products. And so, I mean, even getting people to agree on what to call this has been challenging over the last 10 years. I think there's some good efforts that have happened in the last 2 years in terms of alliances that have formed within Europe, within Asia Pacific broadly, to sort of unite companies under a single umbrella and push things forward. Most of that is focused on regulation, for sort of obvious reasons. But I think, nonprofits like GFI and other stakeholders in the industry can do a good job in terms of setting expectations for the industry and trying to level set. This is not something that happens overnight. These things take a while. Advocating for more money on the public sector to come in. I mean, all of those things are going to be really important. Bringing all these people together is not the easiest thing to do. It's going to take some time.
Maybe just jumping in there as well. So a week or two ago, there was the launch of the CLIF initiative in Singapore. It's led by actually GFI and the Agri Biotech Knowledge Center. CLIF stands for Communication Leadership in Future Foods, and they're a wonderful group of people. I think GFI, Future Ready Food Safety Hub in Singapore, Asia Bio Business, they've really come up with a very comprehensive plan to help people with risk communication, and I think that's a good way to get started, right? It's people who are, and you need to make it a viable model for doing this work. It is work, and be it sort of working in partnership as a consultant to companies or even to regulators. I think that's really important as well.
I think GFI is doing a good job, and some of the communication which is being done and the scenario which has been painted so far has helped this industry to grow. I believe that, as Elliot mentioned, there are a lot of organizations in Europe, US, Japan, and in Asia by helping with the, talking to the governments on the regulation side. And I believe that, a lot of us as an individual company, we're not talking to each other, but we can come together and we can define what are the questions which we need to answer in terms of regulation, in terms of communication, in terms of liaising with the government or regulatory bodies, right? All this kind of, I believe, we need to define first as a success matrix for us. Like, if in an ideal scenario, if you get these things right, then probably as an industry we can succeed, right? So that's not been happening. Incoherency, we are like fragmented in terms of like one company is trying to do one thing, another company is trying to do other thing, and that's where the message is being lost. And as a group, we are not able to be an effective force to talk to or negotiate with the governments and regulatory agencies. So I think it's very important at this point in time that some of us should take a lead and define those criteria. Probably GFI can help as well on this, that we need to define those criteria. What is the ideal situation where we can, what type of question we can ask, and what kind of resources we need from the government and regulatory bodies to make this a success. So that has not been happening. It's very inconsistent, and sometimes the communication is not up to the mark, I would say.
I think another thing to add here would be the communication around this. The question we need to ask is how much of it is happening in terms of, say, GF or any of the ones taking the lead, right? They're doing a fantastic job, of course. How much of it is going within the industry, within the walls or the bubble of the industry versus outside, right? We clearly need a lot more engagement with the traditional food companies, traditional meat companies, government entities, all kinds of different parts of the whole food ecosystem just traditionally, to be involved in the mixture, in conversations that we have, in nomenclature that we try to set, in terms of bringing their opinion into the mix, in terms of being able to have a conversation with them. And I think oftentimes we all suffer with the situation that founders often suffer in a startup, right? Which is living inside the startup bubble. And I think we need to keep on constantly telling ourselves to poke that cultivated meat bubble that we are all part of in terms of, both pushing the industry ahead and also then creating that bubble in a way. But how much can we keep on poking it, blasting it open and continuing to work more realistically with the outside world at play as well. And I think more of that happening globally, I think is a great idea. And I think I mentioned India earlier. I should add China into the mix as well. These represent, a large percentage of the population of the world as it stands today, and by 2050 as well, when we talk about 10 billion people on the planet. So I think geographically expanding reach within these countries in terms of involving the traditional food entities, the end customers, the governments here is important. And I think as an investor, I should personally add, this is part of what I've been doing for the last few years, is in the investment community as well. Try to bring, deep tech investors, biotech investors who are not focused on all protein or may not have done an all protein investment before, or a cultivated meat investment before. Try to bring them into the fore. Try to use opportunities to educate them about this new sub-vertical within the alternative protein industry that is emerging around the world. And I think there has been a lot more sense overall. This a third area that I want to mention is I think we have to, while we do have environmental benefits, and of course this is a better food future that we're trying to create with cultivated meat, the way to bring everyone in the fold is to not pretend to be holier than thou, right? And I think we need to start being more practical in our messaging on that front. Cultivated meat is the savior of tomorrow. Well, in some ways it is, but messaging can be different to ensure people don't get turned off. That, hey, what you're doing is ridiculous. What we're bringing to the table is much better. What you're doing is dumb. That's never going to be a good way to approach and bring in partners, essentially. So there needs to be more, I think, attention paid to how we present it and how we talk about it.
I totally agree with you, Jinesh, that we need to bring in the existing legacy businesses. And at Umami, like, we identify this problem that you cannot do everything on your own. And there are like traditional meat companies or food businesses. We need to talk to them and bring them onto the table, because that brings a lot of credibility, right? Just imagine that who's of traditional meat industry or food industry, they are coming on the same table where cultivated meat industry is. That brings a lot of value, because they have already well-established chain in terms of marketing, branding, resources, infrastructure. They have everything. And if we manage to convince them that this is complementary to whatever you are doing, and that can bring more sustainable solution, or maybe help you to start a new kind of product line, a new brand under the cultivated meat, I think that can be that should be the way to communicate with them, rather than posing us versus them, because that's not helping us. And which happened, I believe that exactly what happened, that we came across as an industry that we are going to challenge the traditional meat industry, our traditional food businesses, and that's kind of also percolate to the traditional agriculture business, right? So if you have such a strong opposition and an opinion about a new industry, which is still yet to realize the commercial potential, I think that will not help us. So we need to bring all these people on the table.
Simon, I want to ask you, sort of in alignment with what we were just discussing. I know that part of the reason why we started the CMMC is because there's this realization that the more folks who are sharing data, the more folks who are sharing their common challenges, the more we can support the industry broadly with computation. I'm wondering what are some of the headwinds perhaps that you've seen with getting more folks to share and establish sort of a baseline of what the common challenges are and things like that?
Yeah, sure. So one of the great challenges with computer modeling and simulation is that models cannot be built without data. Whether they're machine learning models or mechanistic models, whether they're models that are based on statistics or models that are based on rules, They need to be driven by experimental data and expertise. And when the expertise is under the cloak of proprietary information, it's been very difficult to get companies to share their data, their problems, to match up people who are really enthusiastic about helping companies make progress faster, about solving their problems, applying modeling. It's been very difficult for us to establish projects with industry. Instead, we tend to do these one-off proprietary projects where the results are never actually shared with the broader community, and that makes things difficult, because one of the big hurdles in getting computer modeling and simulation into a company is overcoming the skepticism that biology is too complex, it's too complicated to model. Well, I mean, computers are very good with complexity. They manage that very well if you can provide them with the information needed. So we really need more open examples of experimentalists collaborating with computational modelers in tandem. So when the modeler says, well, I need this data, the experimentalist can run their experiment and measure the things the modeler needs to make progress, and the modeler can share their results with the experimentalist and debug it, and have that virtuous cycle that ultimately ends up with a model that's predictive and useful in practice. So those kinds of collaborations need to occur more often, and that's one thing that the CMMC is very much looking for, opportunities where companies are willing to say, look, we'll work with you. We'll work with you computational scientists and run the experiments that are needed, gather the data.
Yeah, and there's even a question here from Beth in the chat. I noticed significant desire for collaboration with traditional meat companies and with other cultivated meat companies. What do you think will catalyze the shift from competition to collaboration? For any of our panelists to answer.
I think one of the catalysts could be a very structured and very structured value proposition, that if we collaborate with the meat industry or among us as a cultivated meat industry, what is the incentive everybody is going to withdraw from it? So I believe that's not been there so far. So if we manage to, if in future, if we manage to clearly define those value proposition, probably that will definitely help us to collaborate more.
And I saw some heads nodding.
I think initially the mindset was that companies wanted to do everything in-house, right? But I think now everybody agrees that that's not possible, and I think that itself, the fact that it will be a win-win proposition on every side, is enough of an incentive for this kind of collaborations to move forward.
Can you say a little bit more about that, Viknish? What sorts of things are people trying to do in-house, or what's the difference between let's do everything in-house versus let's team up on some other things?
Yeah, because see, the process of making meat is not trivial, right? There are many complex processes involved, and from cell extraction to generating a cell line, to the appropriate media, to the scaling up of cell growth, to the structuring of cells, and the scaling up of meat in 3D, and then you have the taste factors and the nutritional factors. It's a very complex, I wouldn't say a complex problem, but it's intricate. Like, each step is intricate, and so for any company to do all of these things in-house would either take a lot of funding and expertise or a very long time. But if each step of this, including, like, I didn't speak about the different channels of distribution, right? But if we can leverage on each other's expertise, where we can tap into, for example, with the meat companies, the channels of distribution, with enablers like us, with things like scaffolding and scaling of cell growth, And in this way, if different companies work together, I think it will bring the whole industry up, and which will be good for everyone, rather than trying to do everything in-house, which we have seen over the last few years may not be the best approach. So that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, thank you.
Just adding to Viknish's point, like just imagine that one company wants to do cell line media development at the same time trying to reinvent the entire bioreactor, entire bioprocess, right? Just imagine the amount of money they will require just to fix this basics, and that will not guarantee you to take you to the next level of commercialization. Then there is a whole new game of establishing your own factory, and that can be already like investing like hundreds of millions of dollars with no guarantee for success, right? So I think that need to be understood by all of us, that we cannot do each and everything on our own. We have to bring in the people on the platform who are great in doing something. So probably the bioreactor companies can help us, developing some sort of bioreactor which can cater to the cultivated meat industry, or somebody who is great at developing some of the process at computational modeling, or control systems which can cater to the cultivated meat industry. Because even if you go to develop just the control systems for the bioprocess, it's a very costly affair, and then still it doesn't guarantee the success. So just by just fixing the base will take so much of time and so much of money that the company might exhaust before it makes the first check for itself. So that's why the collaboration is necessary. We have to bring in people who are strong in their respective skill set. Let's work together, complement each other, so that this industry evolves. Otherwise, it'll just stay in that bubble that everybody's doing outstanding work, but nobody is generating profit.
So I see maybe we have time for one last question here. Swetha wrote, how open is the cultivated meat industry towards adopting, testing new research data towards technology fine-tuning? For example, licensing out technologies from patent holders like universities, research institutes. That seems to be in a little bit of alignment with what we were just discussing as well.
Maybe I can share a little bit, and then someone else can continue. So from my experience, we are very open to working with new technologies, and we are in the process of doing that too. But some universities have very rigid guidelines, in the sense that they always want to own the IP, and that's a bit of a deterrent for many startups and for many investors. While we are also talking to some universities that are very open to allowing the startup to take on the ownership of the IP if they are able to take it forward, right? So I think a lot of traditional universities need to change their mindset as to what they want the technology to do. They need to understand that they are not the hub for the technology, but rather the technology will go further when it's taken on by a company to actually make it into a product. So that's a little bit from my experience, but I want to hear the others too.
Well, I'll just add, I think there's a big opportunity there. I mean, we talk a lot about creating fit for purpose technologies, and so a lot of things that are, have been created in the past for other use cases could potentially be adapted just to be more fit for purpose for meat creation. And so, I mean, we are, starting to engage tech transfer offices. We actually hired a position called the Scientific Partnerships Manager that, specifically meant to build these sorts of bridges, and our different GFI affiliate organizations are, building relationships with TTOs across universities around the world. And I'd say at Tufts University, there's a good example of this, which is they have now basically entrepreneurs in residence that are spinning out, patents specifically at the university in tandem, with the tech transfer office, and really to create a pipeline of technologies that can go straight from the lab into the industry. And so I think, there is a big diversity, as Viknish was saying, within academia of how universities treat this, but some of them I think are going to be more malleable and want to sort of capitalize on this opportunity. So identifying those groups is stage one.
I think, there are two issues on the collaborating with academic institutions. One, as Viknish mentioned, that, they want to largely own the IP. The second issue is the pace with which we work as a startup and as an academic institution. The pace, there is a lot of difference in the pace we would like to work. Another thing which can potentially help to kind of get to know the technology which exists or already in some form, they are not 100% proven, but somebody's doing research on it. I was discussing with somebody in Singapore that there's not enough resources available to tap into those technology to understand that somebody is some scientist in certain institution developing certain technology which can potentially fit for cultivated meat industry. The reason there is no common platform, either there are the patents which are fully published, so you have to go and search, but the intellectual property which are in the process of being generated, we have no access to. I just gave a suggestion to someone that is it possible that we create a platform where the technological development and some research can be just mentioned that this research is being done and potentially that can help us to scout for those technology. So we need not to go and create like individual contacts with research institutions or the scientist. We have a common platform. We go there and we have a look. Oh, these are the technology which are available, and probably this will fit into our narrative. And then I approach that scientist or that group of people and figure it out the logistics and all the other detailed work, right? I mean, what is the current status is like you have to go to some institution, try to scout by the scientist what they're working on, and then figure it out. So it's a very fragmented approach. But just imagine that research institutions come up with a platform where everything is logged in and you just go. Probably they can keep a small amount of fees or something. You go and see what this institution is all about, and just if something interests you, you can go and explore more and see if it fits into your technological development, or it can expedite your progress. So that will definitely help.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody. I'm just looking at the time, and I know that we need to close here. I want to thank everyone for joining us and having this conversation. And I'm having FOMO, despite the fact that we were just on this call for the last hour. I want to chat for another 60 minutes with all of you together. I feel like we just scratched the surface. So yeah, thank you so much. I want to say one thing. It feels very timely and relevant to the conversation about the CMMC. We are tackling this problem of collaboration and have been for the last 4 or 5 years, and trying to bring people together to figure out what is it that we need to be working on collectively as a group. There's a huge desire for collaboration. We know that there's headwinds against collaboration. There's things that we need to figure out, but our purpose is to be building things that can help the whole industry rise and discover what those common challenges are and how we can solve them. So I think it feels good for me to be a part of this conversation, listening to you all and realize that I think we're on the right track. Some of the things that we have going, one of the things that we have going, I want to mention really briefly, we have a bioreactor evaluation toolkit. One of the challenges that we keep hearing over and over from folks is, hey, it's really hard for us to actually evaluate the products that are out there in the world to know what's best for our particular bioprocess, to know what's best for our particular cell lines. Cell lines are different, not only across species, but from one line to another. And they all have different needs in terms of oxygen and pH and nutrient balance and shear stress and the tolerances for those things. So what we are beginning to do is say, hey, let's put together a tool that will help these companies be able to evaluate what would happen. So imagine going into like a web interface and saying, I want to try out this bioreactor. I want to spin it at this RPMs with these impellers at this point in the axis. What happens? Give me the data. So that's the sort of thing that we're envisioning, so that people can be much more educated, companies can be much more educated about their various options before they make significant investments in hardware in this infrastructure stuff. So those are the kinds of things we're doing. We're also really interested to know what are the challenges that you're seeing. And I saw in the chat a lot of folks were writing down, hey, there's some things that we want to be a part of. There's things that we're trying to explore, partnerships, ways for us to support different parts of the chain of the bioprocess, what happens as we create this product. We want to understand, we want to hear from you. We want your voice in helping us navigate what problems do we focus next. The CMMC is also able to orient attention towards specific problems and say, hey, is this the thing we should be solving next? And then here on the screen, of course, this is the ubiquitous QR code that will take you to a place where, if you are so inspired, you can help support our mission to bring all of this together and elevate the industry, accelerate the industry for all, if you care to do so. But as much as we would love to have your support financially, we'd also love to have your support here and here. So please do join us and help us to keep this conversation growing and alive. And thank you all again so much for joining and bringing your heart, soul, and intellect to the discussion. Thanks for your questions. I saw that there were some questions that we did not get time to ask. I would love to be able to ask our panelists and other experts in the space. So you can join our Slack community, where you can ask questions broadly of some of the folks in this call and others who are in the space. So if you're curious about something and you're like, oh, well, how do I do that? Visit us at thecmmc.org, and we can get you hooked up and find your way into a community where these sorts of questions are being asked all the time. So with that, thank you all so much. Really appreciate it, from all around the world. Hopefully we'll get to all see each other again and have another round of this. Thanks a lot.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye. Have a great night, day, morning, etc.